Okay, this is the conclusion to my philosophy of time series, but really the academic, rigorous portion of it is concluded. And I want to discuss time in the autistic spectrum. And I think that it is I'm not a psychologist. I don't claim to be a psychologist, but I'd like to discuss time more from the human element, or how human beings experience the flow of time. And if there's a rule that states that if you have met one person with Asperger, you've met one person with Asperger. And so no one can claim to speak for the entire spectrum. I cannot claim to speak for people who might be nonverbal, who might have Asperger but have differing types that might I might not have that much experience with. So I do not claim to be a spokesperson. I simply claim to be somebody with a set of observations. And again, when I talk about the passage of time, I'm talking about time now as experienced on the individual level. We note the passage of time in discrete units of measurement, of course, days, weeks, hours, years. But we also notice the passage of time in another respect, and that is we notice the passage of time in human markers, birthdays, weddings, graduations, bar mitzvahs, confirmations, um, retirement parties, so on and so forth. And these are social markers of time. If one person were to retire at 65, another person were to retire at 70, and then a third person were to retire at 55, those would be the same marker in a person's lifetime, regardless of their chronological age. And so, in a sense, the experience of time on the human level is as important to an understanding of time as any grand narrative. You know, whether you're an eternalist or a presentist, whether you are a relativist or a quantum theorist, whether you are believe that objects remain the same through time, whether you believe that objects are different at each instant in time. And I didn't discuss that during the philosophy of time series, but that is a debate also. Whatever the case may be, the human experience of time is extraordinarily important. It is my perception of neurotypicals, okay, of people who are not on the spectrum. And again, I hope no one who's neurotypical would be offended, but my perception of neurotypicals is that the passage of time is experienced primarily as something social. In other words, that the movement through time is experienced in realms that are defined very socially. Work is defined socially, and that we all participate in. But also off time is experienced socially. That it's experienced in a way that is communally defined. If you go to a dance club, you go at 8 o'clock, and other people are going to be there. Therefore, that 8 o'clock is defined. Yeah, sure, it's 8 o'clock on the clock, but it's defined. But really, it works backwards. 8 o'clock is defined as when you arrive at the social club. That is what 8 o'clock means, or the dance club. That 8 o'clock has no real meaning apart from that, other than as a measurement on the clock. But it corresponds to, if you keep regular time, there's a bijection or one-to-one correspondence between 8 o'clock and when you arrive at the dance club. But if that time you were to arrive at the dance club were to change earlier and later, it would be the time you arrive at the dance club. That's how it would be, and it would be defined socially. Now, I believe that the same would be true of people on the spectrum, although that can vary. If you've met one person with Asperger, you've met one person with Asperger. There are those who keep a very regular schedule on the clock, in which case the clock rules what they do as opposed to the other way around. And that's definitely a phenomenon that's there. I don't think that that's universal. What I would say, however, is that my sense of the spectrum is that time is perceived more individually. That the flow of time, that again, as with neurotypicals, time is not rigorously, or the experience of time is not rigorously defined according to intervals or units. 8 o'clock might be the time that someone goes on their computer and reads a publication on number theory. Okay, or whatever it might be. And obviously, if that time were to change, then sure, that marker would change from 8 o'clock, assuming that one is flexible enough to have their time marker change. And I think that the notion that all people on the spectrum are rigid and inflexible about time is a stereotype that needs to be dispelled. Okay, so if one is flexible enough that one can change when they experience a certain event, then sure, that as a marker in time, as a marker in subjectively perceived time, that will 8 o'clock will cease to be significant, and 8:30 will become significant, or 9 o'clock, or 7 o'clock, or whatever the case may be. If one has a preferred time to do something and that time is missed, that will definitely be experienced as a missed time or as being out of time. And that's true of autistics or neurotypicals or Aspergerites or let's just say wherever on the spectrum one might end up being. However, I would say that for people on the spectrum, that's maybe experienced a little more immediately as a problem. That when one misses, when one has a schedule and one has a way of having adapted to the world of, primarily the world of social time, because if social time and individual time jar with one another, there's a problem. And if one has a way of having adapted to social time and that jars with individual time, that can present an issue or a problem. Well, there really is no summation to this. I don't think that there's, these are more of a series of observations than any general conclusion that I could come to. But I'll try to arrive at some kind of a closure, at least, if not a conclusion. And the closure would be as such. We began this series with, can one be an eternalist and also believe in contingency? We went through the development of the Western linear concept of time. We went through relativity, a few disagreements there on the issue of simultaneity. We went through all the way until we discussed the philosophy of history. And history, and all of these are notions of time experienced very much as either something in nature or as something experienced socially. My sense of the experience of time on the spectrum is that it does tend to be experienced more individually. It might be that it's more subjective in one sense, but also I believe that there's an internal consistency to it. Now that's very important, because if you have philosophy or let's say psychology of time A and psychology of time B, and psychology of time A argues that it has more of an objective understanding of itself, i.e. I adhere to the clock better than philosophy of time B. Well, the problem is if philosophy of time B has an internal consistency to it, if the way that a person on the spectrum experiences time has an internal consistency to it, then is philosophy of time A, i.e. the neurotypical understanding of time, more correct, quote unquote, than time B? If time B has rules that apply to it that are rigorous, that are simply different than time A, then can either say that they are more accurate. Time, it might depend. And sometimes there are, we do live in a social universe, and I think that those who follow time B would need to acknowledge that, and would need to, definitely should acknowledge birthdays and Hanukkahs and retirement parties and marriage engagements. I think that's important. I mean, we live in a world, and people should be respectful and kind. But for philosophy of time B, those might not be as important as other things, but they might respect that importance for those who follow philosophy of time A. So the best answer to reconciling the two understandings of time would be mutual respect and empathy, and attempt at understanding. But I don't know that any human construct of time necessarily conforms to the universe. And I think if any human construct of time were to claim that, the burden of proof would be on that human construct of time. And it's on that note that I'm going to leave this series and say thank you very much. I appreciate it.